Produced by Podcast Architects.
All right, welcome, ladies.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah. Ladies and gentlemen, any pets that may be listening, this is Get Better at Business. I am Travis Richards. This is Chris Buckner. What's going on, my man?
Oh, it's just another lovely Friday. It's you're getting old when you are welcoming the rain in such emphatic enthusiasm. So, been a good day.
That's been one of the most surprising things about getting older for me is that, you always heard these cliches whenever you're growing up about people talking about the weather. And you're just like, why on earth would we ever discuss that? Now I find that I talk about it like literally all the time. And
all of my friends got rain gauges, all of them. And I'm like, oh man, gosh, we are getting old.
Yeah. So, what do you do with the water that's in the rain gauge? Like, I mean, is it like, you drinking it as part of some kind of spiritual experience to, be in touch with the... Yeah.
You take a shot. Yeah. A shot for the gods. Exactly.
Absolutely. Well, I appreciate you coming on. Excited to learn a little bit from you. Hopefully learn a lot from you, but just give me a little background. Like, how did you, what has brought you on this long and winding road to appearing on the podcast today?
Yeah. This is a 4-hour episode, right?
Yes, absolutely. Yes. This is part 1 of 7. And so take your time. Yeah.
No, I graduated from A&M business degree back in 2007, and I wanted to work in advertising. And when I say work in advertising, I wanted to be Matthew McConaughey in the movie How to Lose a Guy in 10 Days. That's all the way down to marrying Kate Hudson. And it just wasn't happening. I couldn't get a foot in the door, and I was being so naive and, blatantly, I was pretty dumb. I didn't really have any experience that would warrant me having the capability of getting into one of the biggest ad agencies in the world, but I kept shooting for the biggest. So I was doing the, McGarrett Jesse's GSD&Ms here in Texas, and I was doing the BBDO and Wyden Kennedy's, and I was making no progress whatsoever. And then what really kind of started my entrepreneurial side of my life was I kept getting rejected by not just these ad agencies, but I made it real far in this deal with Facebook. I think I did some like 7 or 8 interviews, and it was going to be a really cool job in the advertising space. And I ended up losing it in the last round to somebody else. And I just said, you know what? I'm just going to kind of make my own path. This is getting really, really frustrating to me. And what a goofy thing to say, but I decided to start my own company, first company in 2014, and which was a sports social media application. And really funny, people always tell me about the beginning, and I actually say I don't like talking about it because it was a little bit lucky. And the truth is I had this idea. And then one of my mentors just happened to own Yahoo Sports Radio at the time. So when I brought him just the idea, 10-page PowerPoint, it had like clip art in it. It was that bad. And he said, I want in on this, and we're going to put the Yahoo Sports Radio name behind it. I was able to go raise fairly quickly my seed round to go actually create the idea. And then so did that, and we were acquired essentially in 2016. And then started my second company as a subsidiary of my first company in the esports space. And again, through networking, somewhat luck, whatever opportunity I know, we actually did really, really well in my second company by very early on partnering with ESPN to do a TV show for them. And then from there, we created a software company that was used by almost 100% of the Division I colleges for their esports program. So now I'm on to my next venture, and we just started, but I was contacted by y'all. I'm obviously an Aggie, and we're happy to share the story. And I'll say this, I'll end it with, I tell everybody this, I'm not great at telling people what to do at all when it comes to their businesses and stuff, but I am unbelievable at telling people what not to do, because boy, did I make some mistakes. So
Dude,
happy to chat about it.
I've heard that from a lot of people, and I think that I don't remember where I heard this, but it's like if you talk to somebody that only wants to talk about the great stuff that they've done, they're probably a loser.
full of
But if
crap.
you, yeah, but if you talk to somebody that every single successful person that I've talked to, it's like they only want to talk about their mistakes. They want to talk about, hey, this is where and it's because that's where you learn, right? Is that you don't, success is not the best teacher. It's, all of the screw ups. So, I'm kind of interested that a lot of people have the perspective that, entrepreneurs are just kind of born, and it's like you hear all these stories about people's like, I started my first business whenever I was 3 years old and I had a lemonade stand and all that. Is that the case for you? I mean, you got out of school and you wanted to go work for a, big giant company, and, so looking back, do you feel like, oh man, I was always an entrepreneur and I just didn't know it? Or what were you
I
like
mean,
as a kid from an entrepreneurial perspective?
I well, so I mean that is so funny that you brought that up because I always say like I was never the kid that had a lemonade stand. I was never the kid that was. I did mow yards and I did that kind of stuff, when I was a kid. And I got in trouble one time because I was trying to sell my brand new baseball or my brand new basketball cards that my dad had just bought me. I went out to my curb and was like trying to sell these cards, and he was like, "What are you doing? I just bought those for you today." So if I was an entrepreneur, I was a terrible one. But I don't know. I didn't really have an entrepreneurial spirit in the sense of like going out and starting my own thing. I think what I had was I liked being a leader. So when I was, I was a yell leader at A&M, and I know pun intended almost, but what's funny about that is I thought that you had to be in the Corps to be a yell leader at A&M. So I knew I wanted to be a yell leader when I was like 4 or 5 or fourth grade, fifth grade. I can't remember when it was. And so I did like all these things getting ready to come up to A&M, including doing JROTC in high school because I thought, well, I have to be in the Corps, so I'll do JROTC. That way I'll be extra prepared, and then I'll go into ROTC for there at A&M. Long story short, Dad tells me, well, you don't have to be after I'd already gone through 3 years of being in the JRTC, which I loved. But I liked leading a lot. I wouldn't even say I'm the best leader when it comes to business, but I definitely had a passion for leading. And so I didn't have that entrepreneur spirit. I was entrepreneurial, is what I tell people. I'm not like an entrepreneur. I'm entrepreneurial, meaning I just want to keep doing new things and like trying new things and whatever that might be. And so it really wasn't. I mean, to be honest with you, it really wasn't until 2013, 2014 that I said, you know what, I'm going to just do this on my own. I'll figure it out. And then I guess the rest is history, as they say. So yeah, I didn't have it. I wasn't hawking, lemonade when I was a little kid.
Well, do you look back though, like now that you're kind of in it, do you look back at your, other chapters of your life and kind of have anything that you're sort of like, now that I'm looking at this through the lens of like being an entrepreneur, like I kind of understand this aspect of my past a little bit better.
Yeah, I mean, that's a very deep question. I think so. I look back on some of the things that I did. It's funny. I'm almost going to make you be like a mini therapist to me here because I don't know the answer. But I remember growing up when I did things that whether it was all the way back in elementary school, whatever, student council, right? You did student council in even in elementary school, middle school, all that stuff, and being involved with different organizations. I don't know what it says about me back then, but I always wanted to be in a leadership role, but I never wanted to be the, president of NHS, the president of student council, the president, but then as I started getting older, I did. I found myself in JRTC, for instance. I was the battalion commander for the state of Texas at one point, and I think as time went on, and then I moved into the work realm, I got extremely fortunate and I worked for Vaughn Construction kind of right out of school. Vaughn Construction is a group that did Kyle Field and MD Anderson, all this stuff, and best people I could have ever worked with in my life. And I didn't do anything construction related, but they gave me this opportunity to run this thing called their Profit Center there at Vaughn Construction. And so I got to run my own business at 22 years old. And I didn't really know that going in, that it was going to be all on me. So I got to learn almost on accident pretty quickly what running your own business did look like. And then it also gave me that like thirst of like, well, I want to keep growing that. I want to keep growing myself. And so looking back at that, I have never once thought about it this way. So you nailed it. I think I started in this thing where I wanted leadership, but I didn't know if I wanted it. And then I knew I wanted it. And then it became, I can do this on my own type of thing. So I guess it was a little bit of growth.
Very interesting. Very interesting. And so as you look back at your kind of earlier years in, entrepreneurs, like what was it like, like you said, you kind of got, well, I guess I want to know what were your expectations whenever you went to the Yahoo Sports Radio folks and you were first pitching? Like, did you think that it was going to end up in like, all right, dude, let's make this a real thing. Let's go raise some money. No. Or like, what were your expectations going into that meeting?
Well, so I knew nothing about entrepreneurship. I certainly knew nothing about fundraising, venture capital, seed, family office, high net worth individuals. I knew nothing, right? And I had this deck. I knew for a fact that I wanted to do something on my own, but I also knew, this is going to be a slug. I don't know what I'm doing. I need to jump all the way in, and it just moved a little bit quicker because when I went to that meeting was not meant to be an investor meeting. It was not meant to even be any type of pitch whatsoever. It was legitimately, hey, guy's name is David Gow, and I'm giving him a shout out because he's one of the best human beings on the planet. I went to him because he owns Gow Media here in Houston, which is the sports, they own the ESPN affiliate here in Houston, all that stuff. So I went to him and I was like, is this a viable idea? Like, is this a viable, I would say product, but we didn't have a product. And that's all I wanted. I wanted him to just kind of say yes or no. And instead of saying yes, he like kicks the guy out of the room that was in there with us. And he says, I want in. And I'm going, I don't even know what that means. And I had one friend, some of the people that were kind of helping me start all this, that said, well, I have some connections to some investors out of Austin. So I drove down that same week to Austin and I said, look, here's this idea. Here's Yahoo Sports Radio. Here's essentially a contract, a term sheet for them to be a partner. And they're going to push this out over all 250 of their syndicated networks as part of Yahoo Sports Radio. So we got that deal done. I raised off of, with no expectation, no real idea what I was doing, but the people I raised from were really, really amazing people. Well, I remember the very first day, so we raised this money, and I sit down to start this whole thing, and I open up my brand new computer, which is this, it was like a MacBook Air, which I just thought was the coolest thing in the world, back in the day, and I opened it up, and I went like, well, now what do I do? Because I was really just doing it all by myself. So I had no expectations, no experience, nothing. It just kind of like, and this is why it's not a very inspirational story. I don't have this like, yeah, I maxed out 24 credit cards and anything like that. But it was, I will say that it lends itself a little bit to the Aggie Network. A lot of the stuff that had happened previous, like leading up to that, was because of the Aggie Network. So now I just tell people it's all like network, and make sure you're talking to anybody and everybody all of the time. And that has certainly been what's kind of gotten me to this point in terms of having somewhat successful companies.
So I got two questions for you. First one is that if you could go back and talk to yourself before you went into that meeting, would you give yourself any advice, or do you think that going in kind of ignorant and stupid was like made it work better for you?
Again, great question. I would say a little bit of both. So I always tell people, first of all, know who you're going into business with. Make sure that you're not only managing expectations, but that you're defining roles. Because a lot of times, not even in a nefarious way, you might think your co-founder is working on something, but they're not. And not because they just didn't know that they were. Or you're both working on the same thing and you're wasting time together. So I like telling people define those roles, manage the expectations, all that. But it was definitely great to go in without knowing much because I had to get gritty. But the where I messed up, and it carried all the way over into my second company, because remember I started my second company as a subsidiary, was I didn't know what I was doing from a valuation standpoint when it came to like the fundraising and that. And boy, I'll tell everybody, I don't care, that one of the reasons that this last company, I'm moving on to the new thing, is after 8 years of those two companies, I essentially had no real equity at all in my own company because of that very, 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 very first $300K I raised. It wasn't at great terms. And then, fast forward to 2017, 2018, we raised our Series A, a $6.6 million Series A for Mainline, my second company. Well, guess what? That had to adhere to the original structure, so I got diluted there. And then when we did a bridge round, they slapped some preferences on it because my investors are all private equity guys at the time. and the preferences messed up the waterfall. And again, none of this was done in a nefarious way whatsoever. It was lack of knowledge on my part. So while I would say I wouldn't really change much in terms of like, I liked getting gritty and learning and having to find a way to figure it out. That one area is one I don't have regrets, but if I did that differently, things would be different right now. But that's okay. I'm very much okay with it. I just
Oh yeah,
learned
I
the hard
mean,
way there.
well, one of my little like things I've found true is that if you talk to somebody and you're like, hey, if you would, you know, there's really it's a good thing to always be happy with where you are, where you're just like, hey, it's like I'm very happy with where I am. I wouldn't necessarily like I don't wish that things were different, but it's like if you could go back and do things differently, what would you change? It's like hopefully the answer is everything because I'm smarter now than I was. It's like, dude, the good stuff would have been better. The bad stuff I could have hedged or avoided, but it's like somebody that's like, oh, I wouldn't change a thing. It's like, man, I just like, have you been paying attention? Are you
Well, I mean,
wiser now than you used to be?
I'm definitely wiser. In fact, I've been pulled into not only advisor roles, but I've been pulled into like what's called venture partner roles. I've been pulled into all this stuff as the guy, like the resident. Hey, he's going to go through. Let's just say it's your enterprise SaaS agreements that you're going to be putting out to these people. He's going to go through and tell you what you're missing in this thing based off of his experiences. Because I can tell you, at Mainline alone, just over the last year and a half, there were 3 times that we were I don't even think I'm exaggerating. We were a day or two away from being a $100 million company in terms of valuation. We really did get that close 3 times. And then all 3 times they were because of situations, most of them are out of your control. But had I done things a little bit differently, I could have probably finagled it. In hindsight's 2020. But yeah, it was there were really truly 3 times where I sat down and I went, oh my gosh, this one deal alone is going to blow this company up in the best way possible. And then, just like an entrepreneurial spirit, you'll have the highest of high, and then you'll have the absolute lowest of low, all within like a 40-second time span. So I hope that answered your question. I kind of got off there a little bit.
No, but it does kind of open up the other question I was going to ask, which talking about networking, and it seems kind of silly to say this, but it's like for the I'd heard people talk about this, for forever, but I didn't really understand what it meant and the value that it brings until actually pretty recently. And so I'm just curious of your perspective on networking and like, dude, what exactly does that mean to you? What do you look at in terms of like, whenever you're like, Chris is going to go out and he's going to do some networking. Like, well, what does that mean? What are your objectives? I'm just curious of your take on, what does that even mean to you?
Yeah, so I have so much passion about this topic. So, a guy named Paul Posky, I'm not even sure if he's still working. He's probably retired now, but Paul Posky there at A&M, he helped with the Career Center. Then I think he moved over to the association, maybe the foundation, or maybe vice versa. He was like my first introduction. He's the ultimate networker. His role at A&M was to help people that were in the business world that were wanting to change industries, right? So what he would do is use his network to help somebody that maybe worked in accounting find a new job in marketing, or somebody that worked in engineering find a new job in, well, let's just say like starting a new business. Like he did that. And he's the guy that actually, so GSD&M was my dream company that I wanted to work for, probably the largest ad agency in Texas. And they had a big Aggie in charge there. I think he was like third from the highest. And he connected me to him immediately like it was nothing. And I remember thinking like, wow, that guy just connected me to pretty much almost the highest person that I could have ever dreamed being connected to. So over time, I was like, networking is going to be in front and really, really important. But it wasn't. It's so funny you bring all this stuff up. I mean, you're killing it on these questions because I don't particularly like the networking that people probably think of, which is like, I guess I'm just going to go to this event, shake hands with these people, and see if don't get me wrong, that's effective. It's incredibly effective. But instead, it was more like I was very fortunate that I had a network in that started in college because of the L Leader stuff, where it just always became something like I would reach out to somebody and be like, "Do you happen to know anybody that does this over here?" And it was always like that kind of thing. The networking was always kind of around rather than just like walking up to somebody and saying like, "Hi." And I didn't tell you this. My first job out of college was I worked for a radio station here in Houston called The Buzz. and it was cold calling. He was picking up the phone. And let me tell you, I mean, not only was I horrible at it, I hated everything, but I just had a conversation not 2 hours ago with this guy. Like, I kind of love that I did it because that's the hardest form of networking or sales that you can do, is that kind of cold call outreach, especially in radio. You're selling air. You know what I mean? It was kind of difficult. So I love the discussion of networking because the other piece of it is like never burn a bridge, like ever, ever, ever. And that job that I just told you about, the buzz, when I left, I went to my bosses and I was like, guys, I'm really, really bad at this job. Here's my 2 weeks. And they were so awesome. And they were like, no, 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 no. It's just because you're trying to sell direct. We're going to give you agency business. And I was going, no, guys, this square peg round hole thing just isn't going to work. And I stayed really, really close with them. And then they moved up when iHeart Media took them over, Clear Channel. They moved up to the highest people in the whole freaking company. And sure enough, just like 2 years ago in Mainline, my esports business, we partnered with iHeartMedia because of them. So like that networking of like never burn a bridge, like be just as truthful and honest with people, and they're going to open the doors for you. And the last thing I'll say there, because I'm getting off on a tangent, is I struggle with in business. It's why one of the reasons why I'm doing this new company is I get to work with everybody. I don't have a cutthroat like mentality whatsoever, and I always overshare, like always. And while it probably 51% of the time it's helped me significantly, 49% of the time it has really hurt me. Where I've told somebody something and then they went and stole business, for instance. Like that's happened a lot, and it happens in the space that I was in, the collegiate esports space, the most. But I don't want to ever give that up. I want to be able to overshare. I want to be able to work with everybody. I don't ever want to have to think about like, all right, how do I ruin this company? Like, ugh, what a gross way to live. So, and I remember telling my board and my investors, hey, maybe I'm not the right guy because I don't have that. Like, I don't have that killer, kill my partners and competitors and wipe the floor. I kept trying to find ways to work with them, and I'd be like, hey, look, you've got that market, I've got this market. What if we work together? And it worked twice, and it really didn't twice. So I don't know. The networking side of things is really important to me, and I don't ever want to change that.
Well, I think that a lot of it though is that you're kind of that spirit that you're taking into it is the right one. Where it's like I think that the first kind of networker that you're talking about, where you're saying like, yeah, you just walk the room and let me just talk to these people and find out what they do. It's almost like, bad networking is when it's all about you, and good networking is when it's all about the other people. Like if you walk into a room and you just start thinking about like, dude, how can I help this person? How can we work together? How can we collaborate? What are they good at? How can I appreciate what they're bringing to the table so that I could potentially find some creative ways that we could work together? It's like, dude, if you go into it with that mind, then it's just like, that's what actually builds a really powerful network, because it's like, even if it's all about you, if that person can't do something for you, then it's like the relationship is sort of over. Whereas if you walk into it and it's just like, hey, what could I potentially do for this person? How could I help them? Maybe it means that I connect them with somebody else that I know. Maybe it means that I just understand what they do so that I can be on the lookout for other opportunities. It's like, well, now that relationship, like you said, just kind of continues on forever. It's not like, hey, what can you do for me? It's more like, what can I do? What could I do for you? And
Well, that's great. I mean, so let's talk about that for a second, because when I made this transition out of my previous company, my biggest competitor, direct competitor in the space, and our biggest client both came to me saying, "Come here, come help us do what we're doing over here," like, or whatever. And I think that was because when I always talked to them, it was like, "How can we work together? What can we do together? How can I help you?" Rather than it was just like, hey, pay me or, use my services. And so when they found out that I was essentially moving on, they came, both of them in the same week, and said, hey, we'll bring you on as a equity partner in this deal. So that was pretty flattering, but I think it had everything to do with what you just said, which is like, don't go in thinking all about like, what's this going to do for me? Think about like, how can I help them? And then we'll see what happens later down the road.
yeah, you just show up and help people, and then the rest of it
Yep.
usually will take care of itself. So anyway, like great segue though. It's like you didn't take those opportunities to go with your client or your competitor. Sounds like you had something that you really wanted to do, and so just tell us a little about the business that you're in now and what that looks like.
Yeah. So, well, I did make a promise to myself years and years ago, like I don't want to be a part of a business that I don't have equity in, and it's not so much the equity of I'm not driven by money. I want to make sure that if I'm going to put my whole heart, spirit, life into a business, that the decisions I make matter, and that I get to make an impact within the company. And a lot of times, the best way to do that is to put some skin into the game, and have ownership of the company. So the company that we started. It's a company called Pokatok, which is it's very grand in its its quest of bringing the largest sports festival in the world to Houston in Q3 of 2023. So think of like a South by Southwest, but just for sports, sports tech, esports, health and wellness, the media side of sports, and then culture in sports, and kind of like a World's Fair where it's called Pokatok because that was the first ever team ball sport in the world. And so we want it to feel like a festival. We don't want it to be like the Houston Sports Tech Expo. That's not what we want it to feel like, right? We want it to feel like a Coachella, a Lollapalooza, have that festival feel. And so we only really just started midway through February, and the city's already behind it. We've already raised capital. We're starting to already bring on interested parties from a sponsorship perspective, but the really cool thing about all this, talking about networking, is the guys over at South by Southwest who started it. When we met with them, they were just amazing to us, and they said, like they actually went through our pro forma to say like, well, this is too low, too high, too low, not enough security, and not enough people. You're undershooting yourself, and so that was phenomenal to have that kind of help from people that know it best. But the biggest thing they said was, do not make this a once a year event, meaning don't do something for 1 week and then you're done. They said, we get away with it now because it makes so much money, it's fine. But they said that one of their biggest regrets was that they didn't have kind of that media community and content year round, right? So we started what we call a scale up program. A lot of people would call an accelerator program. We actually just finished our first cohort with 5 companies where all we don't take ownership of those companies and they don't pay us. We instead connect them to our network of, I was very fortunate. I worked with every single college in the country. I worked with a lot of pro sports teams in my previous job. So we connect them to pro and college teams. We connect them to family offices, high net worth individuals, venture capital, and private equity groups. We connect them to advisors. We connect them to new revenue opportunities, so potential partnerships. That's all we do. We don't go through their financials and tell them where they're off. We don't go through their deck and tell them this is how exactly you need to pitch, even though we certainly help on that front. And it was a wild success. It was awesome. Opened a lot of eyes to the opportunity that we could have in Houston. Now, a lot of this was because not only the managing director of that program is amazing, the 5 companies we had were all rock stars. So we got really, really lucky. But so yeah, we have about a year and a half, a little bit under now, a year and a half before the festival. But we're going to bring in every sport around the world that we possibly can to let families and people come together, almost like the Super Bowl parties that happen before the Super Bowl, where you can like go and experience with your kids, all that. We want that for like every sport, taking over downtown Houston. So again, huge ambitions, but the joke we always make is, I'll tell you what, either we're going to change the Houston, like it's going to be the sports capital of the world, or we're going to have to move away because it will be a fail. You know what I mean? Like we're going to move to another state and I'm going to become a lumberjack.
Yeah.
But this is the kind of stuff I like. I like the ups and downs, turbulence, and what it takes to get to those points.
Yeah, well, the joys in the journey, as they say, right? It's like if you don't,
You don't know that though until you don't know that, like meaning people don't recognize when they're in that moment, and it's always like you get a little bit past a certain moment, and you're like, oh man, I remember when we worked out of that closet. That was so cool. Well, when I was working out of that closet, I was in hell, So I always never recognize. I need to do a better job of living in the moment.
well, it's the something I think that's always challenging for entrepreneurs is that you all are, like just the nature of, a big part of your job is to be, looking out towards the future, and so it's, kind of your responsibility to not live in the moment to a certain degree, but at the same time, it's, you gotta, you do have to appreciate where you are.
Yep, I agree.
Yeah. Well, man, so Q3 of 2023, taking over downtown Houston. What were there opportunities for people to get involved, and where can they
Yeah.
find out more info and all that?
So right now, so it's funny because this is one of the very, very, very first public kind of opportunities to share what we're doing. We really haven't shared, besides with investors in the city. Nobody really knows about this Pokatok Festival. They know about what's called Pokatok Labs, which is the scale-up program. But the festival has certainly been a little bit under the radar on purpose because really starting in the next probably 2 weeks, we are in full all out like blitz mode because we just wrapped up the first cohort for the Pokatok Labs. And we are going to be looking for, volunteers out the wazoo. We're going to start obviously looking for our partnerships, our sponsorships, our strategic partnerships when it comes to the leagues and, my background both in traditional sports, but more specifically in esports. We're going to be bringing a huge, hopefully some sort of national championship in esports to the event. So we are always looking for not just talent. We're going to be looking for volunteers. We're going to be looking for people that can help from a strategic partnership standpoint. And you can go to Pokatok.com, which is Pokatok. It's phonetic pretty much. So go to Pokatok.com. You can look at all of our media that we're doing. You can look at all of our media and content. You can look at what the festival. We have some mock-ups in there. We have the Pokatok Labs program in there. So yeah, that's where you can go. And it's funny when right before we went live on the show, I do a show called Under the Influencer, and it's all about like sharing a couple drinks with influential people in any line of work. It doesn't matter. Like we have famous people that have their own brand of liquor, so we bring them on, or we have actual social influencers. But you made a comment like, oh yeah, at any time you can just start over. And that's what we tell our guests all the time is like, hey, if you say something that you're like, oh, wait, I don't want that public. We always tell them the same thing. It's fine. You can just tell us. So, but yeah, Pokatok.com, you can see everything that we're working on right now.
Very cool, man. We'll close it out with this. So it's like, kind of going back to the beginning of whenever right before you like almost unwittingly took the entrepreneurial leap. If you were talking to somebody that is kind of on the fence and considering, making some kind of big move or, taking that big meeting, like what advice do you have about how somebody could make the decision as to whether or not that's right for them?
Yeah. Well, I have a couple things and I'll try and keep it as short as I can. First of all, I always tell people like, it's not my place to say, don't go get an MBA, don't go get a college education, don't do whatever. Like that's not never going to be my place. What I do like about entrepreneurship is like even in failure, you learn so much that you become, I don't know how else to say this, a very valuable asset to a lot of people. So even in your failure of entrepreneurship, you become so educated on every part of the business that like it's extremely attractive to me when I see people that are like, yeah, I started a business back then because I know what they had to go through. And the other thing I always say is like, if you don't have the capacity for a little bit of like that roller coaster, being able to accept that roller coaster, I would say like, maybe just think about it a little bit more because I don't think there's anybody that I know that has not had some sort of pretty wild ride, right? And then the last thing I'll say, which is almost contradictory to everything that I just said, I've got friends that graduated A&M in Texas, went into very successful jobs, whether it was in consulting, oil and gas, whatever it might be. And I have one friend in particular that he always has like whenever we have a beer together, 2 beers, right? He'll say, God, and he's killing it, and he'll always say, I wish that I would have done what you did. I wish I would have pursued my own thing because I'm capped out. Like this is really as high as I'll go. And I always have to tell them, hang on, you've got a beautiful family, beautiful job, security, 401k. Like it's not always greener, but if you are, I mean, I would tell everybody to take the leap, but that's only because I'm super biased and I did it. And I'm like, hey, you want to go through hell with me? Great, come on, let's go.
Yeah.
So
misery loves company, right?
Yeah, exactly. So my piece of advice is like, take the shot, but just really have a propensity for a little bit of a roller coaster ride.
Yeah, and there's a you know there's any time that I come across somebody that's struggling with what should I do, and where is my passion and this and that. There's a great article that was written, this has been years ago, by this guy Mark Manson, who wrote The Subtle Art of Not Giving an F. And yeah, I mean, but dude, like, one of the bits of advice that he gives, and this relates to the roller coaster, is he's like, dude, ask yourself what you're willing to tolerate. What is your favorite flavor of turd sandwich? Because everything sucks a little, and it's like, a great example of that is, like, if you cannot stomach the idea of working 80 hours a week, like, dude, don't be a lawyer, because it's like part of the deal when you're starting out. Like, that's part of the dues that's part of the toll you got to pay. And in terms of being an entrepreneur, it's like, if you cannot handle the idea of waking up in the middle of the night wondering whether or not you're going to make it, it's like, dude, then this might not be for you. And it's like,
well, and by the way, I didn't know any better at the beginning, so I just was like, I'll figure it out. And looking back, I mean, I'm glad I didn't know, like you said, because I don't know if I would have done it at the time. Now I'm super glad. But you just mentioned the turd sandwich, the Andreessen Horowitz. I can't remember which one's book it is, but one of the chapters is, and I do say this to everybody, only I actually use the bad word, but I won't do it here. One of the chapters is if you're going to eat poop, don't nibble. And meaning, if you're going to do it, if you're going to do this, go all the way in. Don't half-ass it, essentially. So that was perfect. That's one of my favorite quotes in entrepreneurship. So that you nailed that.
Yeah. Well, I think the sign that you were willing to go after it, even though you didn't know in the first place, that's probably a pretty good indicator that, entrepreneurship is a good fit on you. So
I guess so. That's a good point.
Well, man, I really appreciate the wisdom that you shared, and it's always great to hear how people got where they got. And so, very cool background story. Really appreciate it. And so, we talked about where people can find information about what you're doing. What about you personally? Social media, where do you hang out so people can follow if they want?
Yeah, actually, so if anybody wants to email me, the easiest one is just Buck, BUCK, at Pokatok.com. That's the one I check the most. And then on social media, what's funny is I'm not a big social media guy, except for now with the show under the influencer. You can find that on all of the platforms under the influencerstudio.com. I've kind of turned my own social media into kind of the show's social media. So if you get bored and want to reach out to us that way, it's under the Influencer Studio on Instagram, and then under the Influencer on YouTube and stuff like that.
Very cool, man. Well, dude, really appreciate the time. Those of you who are listening, we appreciate that as well. I found this very, very valuable, and so great to chat with you. And those listening, hope you found it helpful too, and hope you join us next time.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me.
Thanks, dude.